We're 12 o'clock my time, which means it's 2 o'clock Eastern. So we'll get moving. I hope everybody had a great lunch or brunch. I'm still waiting for Dr. G to bring me my lunch that he offered. We're going to have a quick, brief update. First of all, I did get a few messages from folks during the break time that they were afraid Dallas and I really didn't get along. However, we are good friends. Our relationship is making fun of each other. Dallas wants to add to that. I mean, he's the one that bought me my princess tiara because I am a princess. So we do get along. So nothing to be worried there. That's just our relationship. Right, Dallas?
Yeah, whatever you say.
He's a little afraid of me, but it's fine. Yeah. And then I want to shout out Lori Chilcott. You guys, someone needs to catch her. She's at 40,900 points in the leaderboard with Gloria about 22,900 points. So she's the closest one. So come on, guys. And she's also the one in lead of the picture contest. She has 6 likes. So get involved and make this happen. So Dallas, I think it's your turn for the sponsor.
Yes. Our special thanks to Symposium Diamond sponsor Ray Donaway for 30 years of Radon industry leadership and support. The Ray Donaway team invites you to visit their booth to chat with them and take a look at their new fans and their symposium specials and to enter their exciting raffle. So don't forget to visit the Ray Donaway booth. Back to you, Crystal.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dallas. It's a pleasure working with you every single day. I almost believe that. So now we're going to move it to Kyle Hoylman, who's going to start our next session. Mr. Hoylman?
Thanks, Crystal. Good afternoon, everyone from Louisville, Kentucky. I'm Kyle Hoylman. I'm going to provide an update on what's been happening in Kentucky from a regulatory standpoint. We've got some other folks that are joining me. Paul Krievins from the state of Indiana, Randy Lane from the state of Iowa, Aaron Berndt from the state of Michigan, Anita Kopera from the state of New Jersey. Crystal will close out our session with an update on what's been happening in Colorado. And then we're going to flip it over to Dallas and Paul to talk about a unique pilot program that's happening in the state of Indiana. And then finally, we'll wrap up with Katrin Kral from EPA. So with that, I am going to jump right in with the Kentucky update. We've had quite a bit going on in Kentucky over the last few years. Probably the biggest thing that's happened thus far is back in 2019, House Bill 420 transitioned us from a licensure state to a regulation through certification state. So what exactly does that mean? It means that contractors must complete the required training and certification exam from one of the 2 EPA recognized proficiency programs. And then something that's a little different is that certification must be obtained and maintained. So we're not just using the certification program from a standpoint of here's the exam, here's the curriculum. That certification, it was felt was important to also maintain that certification as a condition of being registered to do business in the state of Kentucky. So, and as I mentioned, the registration. So once you've obtained your certification, you must register that certification in Kentucky with the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. That would cover measurement mitigation and/or laboratory analysis. And the application must also include proof of liability insurance, as well as the contractor's QA plan, and that QA plan must meet the ANSI-AARST MSQA requirements. As I mentioned, the contractors must maintain the certification in order to be registered in the state and to continue that registration. They also must maintain the insurance. So the state's actually named on the policy with a notification if that policy is canceled prior to their registration renewal date. And of course, the QA plan would need to be maintained as well. Some of the other things that go along with that would be the ANSI-AARST standards. So the standards were named as part of that 2019 overhaul, and contractors must adhere to the appropriate ANSI-AARST standard for the building type, as well as the QA plan must meet the requirements of the standard. One thing on the back end is the cabinet is responsible for compliance and enforcement. So this is truly a partnership between a state program and the two certification programs to help limit some of the paperwork and streamline some of the processing, but still provide the ability to enforce and conduct compliance audits and things like that. Once that has gone through, the way Kentucky works, we have a statute and then we have regulations on how to administer that statute. So the interim regulation was released by the cabinet in June 20 of 19. So all of this is in effect with the exception of the certification. The certification will be included in the final regulation, which will be filed, we're anticipating in December of 2020. So that back in 2019 kind of shook up the landscape here in Kentucky as far as how contractors operate in the state. At the same time, we were working on notification and disclosure. We looked at what Illinois and Minnesota had done with its law. We talked with our stakeholder group here, and we determined that the Kentucky Real Estate Commission had the ability through a regulation to add notification and disclosure to its seller's property disclosure form. We felt that that was our best pathway, because we didn't want to go back through the statutory process, since there was already a regulation that could allow us to do what we wanted from the standpoint of that language that we all know is so important in increasing testing and mitigation. The stakeholders came together. Those stakeholders included the home builders, the realtors, the nonprofit folks we work with in our state, as well as the state of Kentucky Real Estate Commission. And I'm happy to say that that was a very good process, and we were successful in updating the seller's disclosure form. So that keeps our notification and disclosure all in one form. It's very prominent. There's a call out for RADON. It asks, is there a mitigation system installed? When was the system installed? Has testing been conducted? And then provides a warning statement about the dangers and the hazards of RADON with a strong encouragement to consider testing as part of the real estate transaction. That was completed and became effective in January of 2020. And then the last thing that I'll leave you with in Kentucky is we started with the child care facility bill. That was House Bill 407. That was introduced in January of this year. This bill would require radon testing and disclosure in all 2,000 of our licensed child care facilities in Kentucky. The testing that's included must be done by a registered professional utilizing the appropriate ANSI standard, and it must be done one time every 5 years. And the results of this testing must be prominently displayed in the child care facility, as well as sent home to all parents or guardians. The licensure renewal is when this has to be provided. So if you own or operate a daycare facility in Kentucky, as part of your licensure, you are required in moving forward to provide proof of this testing. The good news is this bill was well received. It passed the House by a vote of 80-4, so very broad support for protecting our younger folks in the state. The bad news is the pandemic came along and our session was canceled in Kentucky, not just for RADON, but the whole session was canceled before the bill could be heard in the Senate. We will bring that back when the time is appropriate. I'm being told that that is not this year, just because the pandemic has been responsible for closing several facilities across the state, and so we want to be respectful of that as we move forward. So with that, that's a quick update on Kentucky, and I'm going to turn it over now to Paul Krievins to talk about what's happening with Indiana, which is a lot of exciting stuff. Paul, you want to take over?
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. I just want to make sure folks can hear me.
Yep, we got you.
Great, excellent. Yeah, so in Indiana, we had the opportunity this year, after coming in and sort of reevaluating our program over the past couple of years, trying to figure out ways that we can more closely tie to national standards that are in place. Just to give a bit of background, Indiana has, for the past 15, 20 plus years, had in its statute reference to the 1993 EPA radon standards, which we all know are just a little bit out of date and a little bit dated in terms of what we're asking for there. And so we were really looking at how can we update that, and how can we do that in the most expeditious manner. We were talking with Kyle and some of the partners from AARST, and really they sort of looked into figuring out that they felt the best way they could do that would be to go through, instead of going through a formal rulemaking process within the state and within our state code, which is a very lengthy process, 12 to 18 months at the earliest, that if they partnered with some legislators and some industry groups, that they felt like they could make that happen a little bit faster, and we supported that. So there was a bill that was passed that originally was written with very specific language as to what was going to be changed, and then sort of tamped down to just say we need to update the state radon code with the intent that we updated to reflect sort of modern best practices today. And so as we looked at that legislation went through. Our session ended right before the pandemic hit, and so we were able to get that legislation approved. That legislation really commanded or pushed the Department of Health to update the residential radon standard. We rewrote the standard to reflect that our Indiana's licensure is predicated upon obtaining and maintaining one of the two NRSB or NRPP licenses for the respective mitigation or testing licenses that we have for the state of Indiana. So the standard was rewritten. It's actually being rewritten currently. We're going through final approval with some of the folks at the Office of Management and Budget and all of the other agencies that have to sign off on this kind of thing. But we really found a lot of support. As we explained to folks, what we're trying to do is modernize our expectations of contractors and our expectations of the work being done on radon in Indiana. And we feel like that's been met with a lot of really positive feedback, both from folks at our governor's office, but also just from the general industry. I don't think we've heard any pushback from contractors saying that they were, confused or frustrated. I think what we were simply trying to do was get our written policies and standards in line with what we know to be best practice across the industry. So we are in the process of finishing that revision now. It should go into effect very shortly, I would expect. Honestly, we made one other change to our state statute that removed or is seeking to remove a provision that allows for individuals to be exempt from any kind of review of their project if they're doing it at no cost and for research. And that particular provision has been one of the more, has been the only thing that's really hung up this particular change. So all in all, I think that's where we're going as a whole with Indiana. We felt like as we tie more closely to the AARST standards, we feel like we can get more closely integrated with complaints and with ensuring that somebody's not licensed in Indiana having had their national license stripped away or vice versa. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Kyle.
Very good. Thanks for the update, Paul. A lot of interesting stuff happening in Indiana. Randy Lane with Iowa. Randy, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. Randy Lane with the Iowa RADON program. I've been in the program since about 2017. One of the first things I was tasked with when I came into the program was taking a look at our rules and seeing where they needed to be updated. We have two rules in the state of Iowa, administrative code rules, one that addresses the licensing of radon measurement specialists and another for the licensing of mitigation specialists in the state. Neither one of those has been updated since the early to mid 1990s. So there's a lot of language in there that still refers back to things like NEHA still having the NRPP program. So what we've done in the last 3 years, basically since I've been in the program, was start to take a look at what changes do we need to make, where do we need to make them, what things have to be done for a rule revision, where we actually have to go through the rule revision process, where it has to go through our state health board, then through the governor's office. But are there things that we can change or update that don't have to go through that processes? And one of the main things we looked at is in Iowa, we've kind of like Indiana have always relied on the initial EPA guidance, standards, protocols when it came to radon measurement and radon mitigation. And so one of the first things we were able to work on was in looking at our chapter 43, which deals with radon measurement. That rule states that pretty basic that measurement specialists must follow EPA radon measurement guidelines and protocols. There's no real specific there on which ones they have to follow. Well, based on that requirement, our interpretation has always been that those people doing measurements need to follow the protocols for radon decay measurements in homes from 93 and the radon measurements in schools from 1993. Well, we were getting a lot of questions from the measurement folks about, okay, well, how do I measure? What am I supposed to follow if I need to measure in a multifamily building or in a large building? So what we had done is says, well, what we would recommend is using the ANSI-AARST standard. Well, in talking with our legal staff and management, the way our rule is written and the reference to the EPA, following EPA guidelines and protocols, that on top of the guidance all surge states got last October from EPA, that their position is that they recommend that surge states follow the consensus standards that have been developed by ANSI-AARST. So what we did in March of this year is we sent out an info notice to all of our licensed measurement folks, basically stating that because of the way our rules are written and the guidance from EPA, that from this point forward, we're going to want you to, when you're doing radon measurements, to follow the protocols for radon decay products in homes, the MA 2019 at that time, the ANSI-AARST protocols for measurements in schools and large buildings, and then the measurements in multifamily buildings. So the MAMF, the MALB, and the MA, so to speak. We sent that note out. And then as far as quality assurance, to follow the MSQA that ANSI-AARST has also put together. We sent that notice out, and so far, we also announced it at the Region 7 stakeholders meeting in March for the folks that were there. And so far, we haven't had any really pushback on requiring that. I think it makes it a lot easier for the measurement folks that, when they go to do a proposal, what they need to tell the client that they're going to do. You know, there was some conflict prior to March with, you know, HUD and their requirement for testing. And so that kind of confused the measurement folks in Iowa because, you know, they said, well, but ANSI says you need to do it this way. Well, now it's clear that we do require them to follow the ANSI-AARST standard. Now on the measurement, on the mitigation side, our rules specifically state that you will use the EPA radon mitigation standard from 1993, revised in 94, and ASTM E2121. Now, our understanding is that ASTM 2121 probably will not get updated any longer. And there again, those only deal with residences. They don't deal with multifamily buildings and large buildings. So at present, back in March, we put together a stakeholders work group of licensed and credentialed measurement folks and other stakeholders here within the state of Iowa for both measurement mitigation to start looking at both sets of our rules. You know, where else do we need to make updates? And both adopting the ANSI-AARST standards are both on that agenda. We don't know, we may have to, when we go to rule revision and actually go to the rulemaking process, we may get told that we have to specify what measurement standards we have to use. But we're also looking at updating then the mitigation standard in Iowa too to the ANSI-AARST standards. It's probably going to take about a year, so probably hopefully by this time next year we'll have some updated standards in Iowa and some updated rules for both the mitigation and measurement side. So that's it for Iowa. Thanks.
Very good. Thanks, Randy. And by the way, I really appreciate the notice on the website. That's been nice to be able to send clients and other interested parties, and the guidance is clear. So it's nice because we have historically run into the same questions you're getting into. Well, what do we follow? So I appreciate you clarifying all of that on the website as well.
Well, and the fact that they're now freely viewable really helps too. It helps especially with our case.
Yeah, exactly. Very good. All right, Randy, thank you. Up next, Aaron Berndt from Michigan. Take it away, Aaron.
Hey, thanks, Kyle. Thanks for having me here today. I'm going to talk to you about the residential building code process here in the state of Michigan. But first, I want to talk about the state cancer plan real quick, because I think that's a huge component. That was the first goal, is getting RNC objective in that new cancer plan for the state. That cancer plan covers 2021 through 2030. So that's a 10-year cancer plan. We were able to do that. That's one of 12 objectives in that cancer plan under the cancer prevention portion. So that was huge for us. And then when we talk about getting into the residential building code process, we know there's a need for changes in our building code. Presently, there is RNC requirements in Zone 1 counties. So they are required to build with radon resistant features in those Zone 1 counties. That's only 9 of our 83 counties. And we know that there's EPA's radon map is outdated. So we know there's an issue with that. According to that map, obviously I just stated there's only 9 Zone 1 counties that requires RNC. And we've been collecting radon test results for the last 26 years. We've got almost 230,000 data points. We know that it's a much bigger issue than that in the state of Michigan. And actually looking at the data, 74 counties out of the 83 have a larger number of radon elevated test results coming back. 74 of the 83 are above the national average. And some of our lowest potential counties are Zone 3 counties. Over some of the test results have had over 100 picocuries per liter. And actually, like Ottawa County, 30% of those test results are coming back elevated in that county. That's the lowest potential county, Zone 3, which has more test results coming back elevated than one of our Zone 1 counties. So we know it's a much bigger issue. It's a statewide issue. We want to try to address the residential building code. In that that process, thankfully, isn't going to take a legislative act. It's more of an administrative process here in the state of Michigan. So to simplify that process, there's other state employees with the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs that come up with a draft set of rules, and they have a committee there. And then it's going to go through a public hearing process where anybody can make a statement and try to address issues in the building code through that public hearing process. Then those statements will go to the committee and they'll decide what to adopt and what not to adopt. At this point, we've put together a stakeholder group, and Kyle Hoylman's a huge part of that, Jane Malone, Bruce Sneed. They've been a huge help to me. So any states out there that are thinking about this process, you're not going to do it alone. There's a lot of people out there. There's a lot of resources in order to do that. But we've got code officials that are involved, builders, directors at local health departments, the American Cancer Society, American Lung Association. So organizations like that are willing to help out. And that's where we're at this point, is we're getting ready to generate that message before this process starts. We're ready to go when it happens. But I think I'm optimistic. We're in a good place. I'm looking for good things to happen. And that's where we're at right now. I want to be quick.
Very good. Thanks for the update, Aaron. And just participating with the first few meetings and seeing the stakeholder group that you've put together, I can't imagine that we're not going to have good success in Michigan, and we're happy to support the process. So with that, we are going to move on to Anita Kopera with the state of New Jersey. Anita, all you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Kyle. New Jersey really appreciates the opportunity to be here today and to let you know about all of the exciting things that are going on with our certification regulations. Our certification regulations are similar to some of the other states, very old. We have not been able to do anything with our regulations since 1991. We certify for 6 categories, and they are radon measurement technician, specialist, and business, and radon mitigation technician, specialist, and business. Our program has had 29 years of experience using these regulations to conduct inspections and, when necessary, to issue enforcement actions for violations of the regulations. And over these years, both the regulated community and our staff have recognized that many of the sections of the regulations are unclear, and then that results in a lot of the citations in the regulations being open to interpretation. One particular recent enforcement case resulted in parts of the case being heard in various New Jersey courts, including the Office of Administrative Law, the Law Division of Superior Court, and the Appellate Division of Superior Court. One of 2 appellate court decisions found that New Jersey could not enforce certain parts of the regulations and instructed us to revise the regulations as soon as possible. So we began to work on the regulatory revision in January 2019. After 4 months, the revisions were going to be so extensive that it was determined between us and our attorney that we would fully repeal and repropose the regulations, or as we like to say, that we were going to blow it all up. And we started that process of blowing it up in May 2019, and we spent months developing the new regulations. We also held a stakeholder meeting in order to obtain input from those that we regulate. And today, I'm happy to report that the draft rule package is headed on the path to the governor's office, after which it will be proposed in the New Jersey Register. And we're hoping that it may be proposed in early 2021. It does take a bit of time to make it to the proposal into the register. At that time, it's available then for a 60-day comment period. And we would also be having a virtual public hearing so that we can receive comments from those that wish to give them via the hearing process. So depending upon the number of comments received, it could take up to a year for the new regulations to be adopted. That puts us in early 2022 for final adoption. So as you can see, it will take approximately 2.5 to 3 years from start to finish for the adoption process to finally be completed. However, it's well worth it after not being able to change them since 1991. So when you blow up your regulations, a lot of things change. And for today, since I only have 5 minutes, I'm going to focus on just 6 of those changes that we would consider to be very important ones. The first one is that the ANSI-AARST protocols are the only standards that will be referenced in our proposed regulations. Since they are the current nationally recognized standards for testing and mitigation, we dropped all of the old EPA and ASTM standards. The second change involves the number of radon tests that will be conducted. In New Jersey, only 1 test is currently required. So now that the ARST protocols will be followed, 2 tests will be required as the protocols specify for all of the time-sensitive testing. And since about 80% or more of our tests are conducted during real estate transactions, and that would mean that that time-sensitive testing would be required for the appropriate devices. So the third change is that the proposed regulations require individuals to have 8 hours of advanced training in order to test and mitigate multifamily, school, and large building types. There's currently no additional training requirement for these building types in our rules. The individuals will be able to take any 8-hour training course that's offered by either NRPP or NRSB for these building types in order to fulfill this new requirement. And we think that these buildings are more difficult to test and mitigate, and we're very, very happy to be able to take advantage of the courses that NRPP and NRSB offer for these building types. The fourth change is that the proposed regulations are going to be much more prescriptive regarding quality assurance requirements. This will hopefully make it much easier for everyone to easily understand the requirements and everything that we expect to be conducted by the businesses and the individuals. The fifth change is one that's going to allow individual certification to be more accessible to individuals. For example, the radon measurement specialist category currently requires a BS in a natural science or an engineering degree and a year of radiation experience. In the proposed regulations, that will be one of the categories. However, people can also have a Bachelor of Arts degree and 2 years of radiation experience, or an associate's degree and 4 years of radiation experience, or also 5 years of radiation experience. So as you can see, this is going to allow more people to qualify. The sixth and last change that I'm going to mention today is a general rethinking of the structure of the regulations. We have put a lot of thought into the way in which we document and list all of the application requirements and responsibilities for each certification category, with a focus on making them as clear as possible and as concise as possible, so that there is as little as possible left open to interpretation. We know we can't catch everything, but we're trying very, very hard to do this. The proposed regulations clearly define the separate responsibilities that a business has and the separate responsibilities that an individual certification category has. However, even though those responsibilities are separated, there can still be instances where both the business and an individual will be held accountable for following the same requirement. So whether you represent a state or you're a radon professional or a business owner, I hope that this very quick glimpse of New Jersey's regulation development has helped you understand how the regulatory process works. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Thanks for blowing up your regulations. I know you all have done a lot of work there, and we can't wait to see these things hit the streets. So thanks for your efforts. And last but not least, Lytle is going to take us home by giving us an update on Colorado. Crystal?
Kyle, I bet everybody's a little tired of me talking, so I'll try and make it brief. So I was enlisted by Kyle and Jane to talk about the legislative efforts we have going on here in Colorado. We started about 2 years ago with the Sunrise process through DORA, which is the Department of Regulatory Agency, where we filled out an application and we're applying for certification and licensure here in the state. With the help of Rocky Mountain AARST members and President Terry Kerwin, Jane Malone, Kyle, and our lobbyist Jay Hick, we drafted our bill mimicking closely that of Kentucky's bill. Colorado was set to introduce our bill for licensure through certification using a third-party certification body like NRPP and NRSB. But unfortunately, COVID-19 happened and the legislative session was shut down for better part of the scheduled season. Only bills related to COVID were heard in the session, and it left our RADON bill to be put on hold. So it was a bit of an unfortunate timing, but with it being in an election year, we're waiting to see how our legislators fared in this past election last week. And luckily, our champions and co-sponsors, we have two representatives, Representative Kevin Van Winkle, who's a Republican, and Representative Daphne Michelson-Janay, who is a Democrat. Both were reelected, which is great for our bipartisan bill we're running. Senator Kevin Priola is the Republican in the Senate that is championing our bill, and he's been working with Jay Hicks. But now we're currently looking for a new Democratic sponsor in the Senate since our previous sponsor actually termed out this past election. So our next step is actually to get the bill started in the House. We're currently trying to finalize who will pull our bill title, and that's going to be between Representative Michelson-Janay or Representative Van Winkle. Each legislator only gets to pull 5 bill titles per year. So we're going to sit down with them and see who is more apt to carry our bill through. Once we meet with them, we'll get our bill title pulled and get our finalized draft of our bill up and running. One benefit we have is Representative Michelson-Janay. She is the previous vice chair of the Public Health and Human Services Committee. And because the chair of this committee was just termed out, it's possible that Representative Michelson-Janay will be our new chair and we'll be able to run our bill through that committee, which would be great. However, there's still a lot up in the air due to the outcome of the election. So we're still kind of monitoring to see where we go with who we have in our House and our Senate. So all of the due diligence will be done prior to the introduction of our bill in January. Our goal is to have our bill introduced as soon as possible. Everyone is going to be aligned once we have that done. And if everything goes as planned, we'll have our bill introduced to coincide with National Radon Action Month. We've had Governor Polis and the prior governors that have been in our state have designated Radon Action Month for Colorado and have signed a proclamation. So we're hoping to have that publicity work hand in hand for our bill's introduction. And then once our bill is introduced, we are hoping that we're not going to see much opposition. Once it's introduced, we know that it becomes public knowledge, but at this point, we haven't had any predictions of opposition coming through. We've been very proactive in working with our stakeholders, with our legislators, and our ultimate goal is to gain tacit approval from CDPHE, DORA, and the legislators. So if we're successful, which all things, fingers crossed, we'll have our bill passed in the early part of 2021. Our advocacy committee will continue to meet with the legislators and stakeholders. And as the process evolves, I just can't say thank you enough to Rocky Mountain AARST, Terry, Jane, Kyle, Dallas, and Jay Hicks, and all that have had a hand in making this process go smoothly. We're pretty excited about our year to come and keep fingers crossed again that we'll have our bill passed next year. So that's what I got, Kyle.
Very good. Thanks, Crystal. Thanks for all of your hard work. We have a lot of good stuff going on in Colorado. So that wraps up the individual state updates. There are more states that a lot of good things are happening in. So I would encourage you to reach out and check in with your your state folks during the designated sessions and just ask what they're up to. I know at least of half a dozen other states that have things in the works. I'm going to transition us over now to learn a little more about what's happening in Indiana with Dallas Jones and Paul Krievins, and an exciting project that we're working on there. Dallas, Paul?
Paul, I'll let you start.
All right. Thanks, Dallas. I appreciate it. Yeah. So briefly, you know, as we were looking at changing our standards, we also were looking at ways that we could improve enforcement. And full transparency, I had a meeting with Kyle Hoylman, I don't know, it was maybe 2 years ago. And we were talking, and Kyle mentioned the Kentucky model that they had rolled out, which was that basically they they pushed enforcement and compliance pretty strongly for a couple of years, and that really sort of laid the groundwork for changing the expectations of the entire industry. That they're, you know, just a couple of years of really standard, you know, sort of expectation building raised, you know, sort of all ships were raised by that move. And so as we were talking about it, you know, we in Indiana really hadn't done a lot in terms of enforcement and compliance. We were still sort of getting our feet under us in terms of ensuring that we had individuals trained who could do that. But I think like a lot of other states, we're resource constrained, right? Both with our CERT dollars and just with personnel and with turnover of personnel. And, you know, as soon as you bring somebody new in, you got to get them licensed, and that takes a while, and then they got to be trained, and that takes a while, and then you got to get them experience, and that takes a while, and on and on and on. And so we looked at that and said, you know, where could we improve? And one of the areas that we thought we could improve was to set up some sort of compliance and enforcement program with the folks in the industry who did this a lot better than we do, and do it every day. And so we originally put together an RFP and reached out to mitigators in our industry and said, you know, we'd love to do sort of an industry monitors the industry kind of approach, like Kentucky had done, and really didn't get a lot of interest from the folks in our network here. And so after putting out a relatively unsuccessful RFP, Dallas reached out from the team over there at AARST and said, you know, we saw your RFP and we have an idea. You know, you guys are adopting our standards as sort of best practice and the established practice in Indiana. What if we came in and provided you guys some support in the way of providing some of that enforcement compliance type work, utilizing contractors that we know do this well, and utilizing the standards that we're really the authors of. And so, you know, hearing that, it was kind of a no-brainer for me. I said, absolutely, why wouldn't we have the folks who know, you know, this industry the best, be a part of that role here in Indiana? And you know, out of that came a couple of discussions and then a proposal for how to do this, and ultimately a contract now to begin doing that for a year and to really pilot it with Dallas. I think we settled on something like 50 or 60 homes to try that for a year and really see kind of where we feel like the strengths are and the weaknesses, and how we can make Indiana a state where we're expecting the best quality, the best accountability from our contractors and from the folks involved in this process. So Dallas, is that a good introduction to what we're discussing here?
Yeah, that's great. It was timely because we are in the process of putting together a radon mitigation compliance inspector certification. And we have a job task analysis group that has completed work on that. They put together the entire job task analysis. They put together an inspection checklist. We actually have that now on the website, so it's where it can be utilized, and everything is data-based as well. And we've even gotten to the point where we have questions ready just about for an exam. So we'll be working to make that certification available in 2021. But what the project enables us to do, working with Paul in the state of Indiana, is to actually get in and work the checklist and the training and whatnot together with people there to go out and do these compliance inspections and discover the things that work and fix the things that perhaps we can do better. And so we're really looking forward to getting that started here just as soon as we can get moving on it, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. So that's where we are with that.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. The other thing I would say too, and just full disclosure here, because I think this is a group where we all sort of learn from each other. And that's one of the things I've realized is that this radon industry spends a lot of time learning from each other. One of the things that we came across just in putting all of this together, I think the partnership between AARST and the state made a lot of sense from a technical perspective, but we also realized very quickly, and apologies for the banging in the background here, but we realized very quickly that there was a need for us to come up with a strategy for how we were going to select homes that were going to be inspected. That is not something that we can hand off to a contractor. It wouldn't be fair to assume that AARST or Dallas would know, where to go and who to look at across the state. And so we began to kind of put together a criteria for contractor selection and how do we randomly sample but still get a good representative sample of all of the contractors working across the state. And so piecing that together has been sort of a work in progress for us. But it definitely something that we're glad to have learned it through this process and really looked at how can we hand a group of contractors and a group of homes over to folks to really get an idea of the quality of work being done throughout our state.
All right, thanks, gentlemen. I haven't done a very good job of keeping us on time, so I'm just going to preface this with if you have questions, please go ahead and get those submitted now, and we will take them at the end. And we are going to wrap up today with Katrin from EPA to provide us an update. Katrin, it's all you.
Great, thank you, Kyle. It's great to be here with everyone today. I am just going to try to share my screen quickly. All right, I hope that you are now seeing my title slide, and just in case, yes?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, thank you so much. So just in case I forget, I've included my contact information on this slide. Please feel free to reach out to me with any questions that you have. All right. So we just heard some great examples of actions that states are taking to directly manage standards of quality for delivery of radon services within their programs. And today what I'm going to do is just share EPA's role in this space, including the proposal that we released through the Federal Register in 2017. I'm going to highlight feedback that we received that is now informing our path forward, and I will share some very high-level next steps. So for the past 10 years, we've worked with federal and non-federal partners to augment our long-standing investment in outreach and education with a strategic focus aimed at embedding quality radon risk reduction into systems that touch new and existing homes. And this work has really shown a spotlight on the importance of standards of practice that set a benchmark for quality and establish minimum requirements as it relates to testing and mitigation practices and provider competencies. And the HUD multifamily policy that was first implemented under the Federal Radon Action Plan is a great example of this. We often hear about this policy in terms of the impacts on the demand for radon services, but it's important to note that the availability of voluntary consensus standards for testing and mitigation played a key role in getting this policy into place. And it's also become clear that for policies like the HUD multifamily policy that are implemented at the national level, it's important to have a uniform way to identify qualified radon service providers. So our non-regulatory proposal is in part served as a response to this identified need, and it attempted to help ensure consistency across credentialing organization approaches with the ultimate goal of ensuring quality of the workforce. And to accomplish this, we proposed to overlay a third-party accreditation or verification process for credentialing organizations that would establish a benchmark for both competencies credentialing organizations are assessing based on voluntary consensus standards, as well as how they are ensuring that service providers maintain mastery of those competencies. The State Indoor Radon Grants Program was proposed as an implementation path for the criteria. So stakeholder feedback is very important to us, and it will ultimately inform our approach forward. And it's important to us that we understand the concerns of people like you who might be impacted by actions that we take. The 2017 proposal was a first step. Our plan is to hold listening sessions to review an updated proposal. Honestly, we're not there yet. So today what I'm going to do is spend some time sharing feedback we received on the 2017 proposal that is informing our updated approach. So you see on the slide, before I get started, sorry about that. We requested feedback in 5 areas. So as you see represented on this slide, we received feedback from 25 entities representing primary stakeholder groups that operate within the radon universe. And the graphic on the right shows the overarching positions that folks maintain regarding the proposed approach. 11 commenters opposed the proposed approach to establish voluntary criteria, particularly as it relates to third-party accreditation. 8 commenters generally supported the approach, in particular with respect to standardizing credentialing organization practices, and 6 commenters offered no clear position. So I mentioned that we asked for feedback in 5 areas, and you'll see those 5 areas represented along the x-axis of this chart. And to help us analyze feedback, we identified themes or issues raised within each area, and then we broke comments out into comment segments by theme. This exercise surfaced common concerns and considerations, as well as highlighted areas that were most on people's minds. And what this chart does is it quickly represents the number of comment segments for each area in which we requested feedback. And I'm going to highlight the themes that emerged within 4 of the 5 areas that were addressed most frequently across the comments we received. So I'm going to start with the overall approach. It's probably not a surprise that we received the most feedback on the proposal to rely on third-party accreditation as an oversight mechanism. A number of commenters acknowledged the potential value in EPA establishing a minimum standard for credentialing of service providers, and they also recognized that standardization of minimum requirements for certification programs and assessments could potentially foster the creation of reciprocity agreements. But as you'll see on the slide, the majority of the comments focused on potential negative outcomes that could result. And this included things like fewer credentialing organizations due to accreditation costs, which could then result in a smaller workforce and additional burden on small businesses, states, and consumers. Folks were also concerned that costs to achieve third-party accreditation would be passed through to consumers. And finally, commenters raised concerns about the time it might take to achieve third-party accreditation, as well as the impacts of using the State Indoor Radon Grants Program as an implementation path. We also asked if the criteria should be applied to state-run programs and tribes. And while several commenters saw potential benefits, most stakeholders, in particular those states who have run their own programs, voiced concerns. And this included things like the potential for an unfunded mandate if we were to link the criteria to the State Indoor Radon Grants Program, the cost burden of achieving accreditation, and the potential need to divert critical grant funding away from risk reduction activities in order to achieve third-party accreditation. And folks were also concerned about the appropriateness of applying the standard to state-run programs, and the need for regulations or legislation to meet the standards requirements. Several commenters also encouraged EPA to consider alternative approaches for state-run programs and tribes. So I just want to pause for a minute and share why the issue of application of criteria to state-run programs is important. And what this really comes down to is the fact that the impacts these programs are having on driving quality. This map identifies the states with licensing and/or certification requirements. And of the estimated 6,300 credentialed individuals, that's not the number of credentials, but the number of individuals, roughly 76% of individuals credentialed into the US operate in states where there are licenses and certification requirements. We also asked for feedback on EPA's involvement in the development of the ISO 17002 program-related components. And while a majority of commenters didn't weigh in and there was no clear consensus, of the commenters that did weigh in, many voiced support for EPA involvement, and they recognized the potential to help standardize competencies and assessments. And several also underscored the importance of including experts in the process, which is in fact a requirement of third-party accreditation to the ISO 17024 standard. Additional themes that emerged in this area you see represented in the last bullet, and includes things like questions about the process for transmitting ownership of program-related components under the ISO 17024 standard. So we also wanted to hear folks' thoughts on devices and labs, because devices and labs are part of the system that supports delivery of quality radon services. And unfortunately, we didn't receive much feedback on this. Those that did provide us with feedback encouraged us to address devices in some manner as part of this effort, as well as to consider a separate process for labs. So moving forward, in addition to the feedback that we received that I just previewed for you, which is informing our path forward, there are several additional factors that we're continuing to weigh. At the end of the day, we're aimed at helping to ensure consumer protection by facilitating access for quality radon services. We want to make sure that an open and fair process is available that considers both existing and future credentialing landscapes. We also have to make sure that any action we take aligns with EPA's statutory authority. And this applies to requirements for us to operate a radon program, which could impact our role in the effort, as well as our state and tribal grant listing requirement obligations and the general grant terms and conditions, which could impact our implementation path. We're also thinking about the importance of aligning the approach with current voluntary consensus standards, as well as identifying an approach that is sustainable not only for EPA, but also the radon service provider industry and state-run programs. So where are we now? We're in the process of finalizing an updated proposal. This will have to go through our Office of General Counsel for review. We will then make it available to folks through our website and schedule listening sessions, which we hope will happen in the next month or two. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Katrin. Good information. Jane Malone, do we have time for one question?
Yes. The next question in the queue is for Aaron. Berndt, when do you see Michigan having license for radon?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know exactly when, but I know there's a lot of support out there for licensing. I've heard that people have called and talked to me about it. That push is not going to come from my office. That's not something that we do. We can't push for a legislative act. That's going to have to be a group that comes together outside of state government that talks to their legislature and pushes something like that. Now, if the legislature comes to us and asks, we can give our opinion on that, but that's not something that we're going to generate. I think there's a lot, again, I think there's a lot of support out there, and I think it will be coming from what I see, but it's really unknown when.
Great. One more quick question. I think it's got a one-word answer for Crystal. Crystal, would someone be able to get certified now and have that carry over when the state ratifies certification?
Yes, we're going through licensure through certification through a third party credentialing, which is NRSB or NRPP. So if you're NRPP certified, yes. All right, so in lieu of time, we are going to go right in. So again, remember you need to leave this session and go into the next session. And if we could do that quickly so we can make sure we have time to get all of our speakers in there. For all the rest of the questions that haven't been addressed, we will do that in the Whova chat on the platform and make sure everybody gets their questions answered. So again, please exit this session and go into the next one for the live stream.